this is Maurine Kwende, your podcast host, and you are listening to the Empowerment Minutes podcast. I'm so excited to get on the podcast today, and today's episode is going to be focused on emerging leaders. So before I get started, I want to take a moment to say thank you so much for being a fan of the podcast. I really appreciate you so much. I'm so grateful that you're listening every week. And I also see that you're sharing and downloading new episodes. So thank you so much. In one of my workshops, a participant asked me the question, what is an emerging leader? And I've been asked that question repeatedly since then. So today, I'd like to talk about what an emerging leader is, what are the characteristics of an emerging leader, how emerging leaders can be developed, and how they can benefit the organization. And so for many of those listeners out there who know me, I do have my company called EMK Learning Solutions, and I also do have an academy for emerging leaders and leaders in general, and just to help them to become better leaders. So in this episode, maybe you're an aspiring leader, maybe you're wanting to get into leadership, or maybe you're just getting started. It's your first leadership role. Hopefully this episode is going to help you with the tips and tricks that I'm going to share today. Is going to help you to become a better leader, or help you, just to take some things to your work to be more efficient as a leader. So let's talk about the definition. What is an emerging leader? Emerging leader actually is a term used for those who demonstrate leadership qualities as opposed to those who needs to be found. So you're an emerging leader when you show those qualities yourself through the work you do. Emerging leaders are identified as those with high potential, those professionals who have a great potential early on in their careers. And sometimes they do have leadership titles, sometimes they do not. So you already know that leadership has nothing to do with the title. You might have a title of a leader, but that does not make you a leader. Right? So I hope you know that. But that's not our focus for today. So now that we've identified or defined what an emerging leader is, someone who has these qualities, who is that person who is considered a high potential professional in the workplace, that may be you. I hope that has given you some ideas of what an emerging leader is. So how do you identify one in your organization? Well, they're easy to figure out. When you have an emerging leader, you can tell that they're very proactive versus reactive. They speak up during meetings. They don't get scared of taking risks. They have very good ideas and they're very results driven. They're part of the vision of the organization and work hard than their peers. They really stand out. They have a bright future and need just a little bit of mentoring and coaching to get there. Here are some characteristics of emerging leaders. They're proactive, like I mentioned. They're resilient. They're goal and results driven. They do not follow the crowd. They're not afraid to take a stand. They are self-motivated and passionate about their work. They're inspiring. They're not afraid to influence others. They actually enjoy leading others. They're honest. They have great integrity and they're inspiring. They influence others, and others even follow them informally because they're inspired by them. Sometimes I go to social media spaces, and right there you can tell those leaders who are just leading those conversations, responding to all those questions. They can hide. You can clearly tell that they're emerging leaders. They have a growth mindset. They embrace failure as a learning opportunity. They do all of this by choice. No one forces them to do it. They choose to do that. They are leaders, and they choose to lead. So these are some characteristics of emerging leaders. So maybe this is going to help you if you're listening to this podcast and you're looking for some ideas to identify emerging leaders in your workplace. Hopefully this gives you ideas on what to do when you get back to work. So now we've talked about what an emerging leader is, what the characteristics are. I also want to clarify what an emerging leader is not. They're not those who play managers or management's favorites. They're not manipulating those that they're leading. They're not manipulating people in their teams. An emerging leader is not someone who's, part of gangs at work, forming those cliques, you know, uh, supporting team members even though they're performing below performance. That's really not an emerging leader, because emerging leaders speak up. Emerging leader is not someone who praises their manager because they're wanting their favor. They're not those who are supporting micromanagement. They're not those who feel entitled to leadership, to power. An emerging leader is not someone who's desperate to show their team that they're better than everybody else. An emerging leader is not someone who is assisting coworkers because they need to return a favor, or they just want to dominate and show that they have power. So maybe some things that I've mentioned give you a clue of someone who's an emerging leader and who's not. So if someone's actually showing some of those things I just talked about in the known emerging leaders list, you want to be able to pay attention and be more intentional. So some common misconceptions about emerging leaders. Most often people think that emerging leaders have to be very young. Oh, they're probably 25, they're 21, well, to an extent. They're actually emerging leaders who are in their 30s and in their 40s. Don't be surprised if you have a baby boomer who have the qualities of an emerging leader. That means they're emerging leaders. So age doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. Some also have the misconception that emerging leaders have to be appointed. No, not necessarily. And some believe that emerging leaders have to be men. Well, don't get me started on this gender thing. I'm going to leave that alone for today. So, what are some examples of emerging leaders that I can think of? Maybe Nelson Mandela's one. Maybe Martin Luther King is another one. These people were champions for change. I worked for an organization a while back where they called their emerging leaders people leaders. That's appropriate, isn't it? Since leadership is about people, while management is about processes. So now that you know what an emerging leader is, what can you do then after supporting an emerging leader? Maybe that's you. You're wanting to find out if you're an emerging leader, and now you know you're an emerging leader. How can you develop yourself? Here's some things to think about. First, you want to be able to lead others. You have to lead yourself first. You have to grow yourself before you can grow others. So take leadership training seriously. In my academy, the Dream Big and Bold Academy, I spend a lot of time, equipping these emerging leaders to become better leaders. As an emerging leader, you have to have a personal development plan. You got to be able to groom, if you're maybe their manager, you got to be able to groom them for succession planning. Give them leadership, opportunities. Expose them to more leadership roles, tasks in your team. If you're able to find a coach or a mentor, please do. Also, take on shadowing opportunities within your organization so you can get some practice. Maybe you want to just volunteer your time as a leader. Those are some ways that you can actually get some experience. Take on challenging assignments, because the law of the rubber band says that you have to be able to stretch yourself, right? By taking on those challenging assignments, it stretches you as a leader. And by stretching yourself, getting out of your comfort zone, that's when you're going to be able to get those skills and get where you want to be as a leader. Within an organization, people don't just become leaders for the sake of it. They need to be visible to their senior leadership team, their peers. So take on projects during your team meetings, speak up. Make sure you're visible within the senior leadership team who are able to identify and see those things that you're displaying and demonstrating, and then they can be able to support you in that role. Find your tribe. Everyone needs a tribe. Everyone needs a circle of influence. Find your circle of influence, people that can help you and give you constructive feedback and help you to grow. The more exposure you have with your peers and in your tribe, the better you would become even more confident and build trust within your team. My academy, as I mentioned earlier on, provides workshops for emerging leaders, and I invite you to sign up for free for these programs. Or if you also have a paid cohort program as well, you're invited to join. So because emerging leaders can help in succession planning, that means that employee retention and morale would actually be boosted. So it's really important to develop the talent of emerging leaders. Once they have these skills and you make yourself visible within the organization, you'll be so glad you did, because you then have the opportunity to lead people. So as a final thought, you're an emerging leader, not what? Can you identify emerging leaders in your organization that you're not proud of? What can you do then to develop yourself to become the leader you and others want to be remembered for? You don't want to be a leader that you're not proud of, right? So what are you going to do then? Are you a great mentor yourself? Those are some things you want to think about. I would like to say to you, do what you need to do to see yourself as a leader, and do what you need to do to bring out the leader within you. Your future self, your employees, your leaders are counting on you. That's it for this week's podcast. To our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in to this wonderful episode on emerging leaders. I hope you found this useful, and please share with your network. You can always find me online on LinkedIn, on social media, or on my website, emklearningsolutions.com. Until then, be safe, be well. I'll see you same time next week. Be blessed.